Welcome back to the new session. We're going to just introduce the new chapter, that is structural geology. Have you ever thought about that? What would be the things which is just below our surface of the earth? Because as a civil engineer, that this would be more interesting for us to know. We may not be able to go deeper into the crust, mantle, or core. Rather, our most of our construction activities will be restricting within a small depth. Well, that would be around 10 meters, 15 meter or hundreds of meters below the surface of the earth. Just for an example, if I take a small part on the surface, okay, so what you see on the screen is a small lake. So there people are moving around. If you are walking around on this surface, during that process, have you ever thought that what would be the layers or the things which are below the surface? And if I ask you this, so then you may be now visualizing that, okay, our surface of the earth, subsurface of the earth would be something like this. Okay, what is it? There are one layer, layer 1, there is another layer, there is a third layer, there is a fourth layer, there is a fifth layer, there is sixth layer, there is seventh layer. Now I'm planning to do some construction activity here, so I will make a small trench. So this will be my foundation part, and I'll construct my building over this. Very simple. Okay, so this may be what a general person may be visualizing the subsurface characteristics. But is it really true? Let us see now what is here below the surface of the earth. Is the layers are horizontal, one over above? Is it is systematically arranged? No. What is happening here? Here, if you see, this is one rock strata. This rock strata goes here and goes something like this. There is another rock layer, and this is something like this. What is happening here? Why is it so? This is how the subsurface on this particular figure it appears. What does it happen? What happens here? What happens here? Does it deposited something like this during the past, or some other activities which played a role? Yeah, this is what we are going to study here. How these things are something like this, because now if we imagine we are going for the same construction activity here, and if I ask you to do a construction on this part, and if you need to make a trench on this, okay, so this much part you have removed. Now here is your one foundation is going, another foundation is going. Now the horizontally the rocks are not same. Here the rock is very stable because the direction to which you are going to provide the force is perpendicular to the rock strata, whereas in this case here the rocks are so disturbed, and when you are putting the rocks foundation here, then the rock is not going to take that load. As a result, what happens when you make the building here, it is actually standing on a poor rock strata, where on this part it's standing on a very strong rock strata. As a result, when there is forces acting on the building, there is a chance the building may slightly slip to the one direction, and it can leave. I'm just talking about a simple building right now, but this happens with all the cases. Now, another situation, if you are going for a construction of a tunnel across this, so here you will know that, okay, these tunnel which are going through these rock types are going to be on different rock strata. But now you are able to visualize these things because we have seen, my point is the rock when we cut the below the surface, there are different varieties of arrangement of rock strata. It is not as normal as we expect. It is not going to be horizontal. So sometimes it may be horizontal, sometimes it may be non-horizontal. So that kind of changes are there on the surface, subsurface. But how do we know these characteristics? We do these characteristics by understanding the exposed strata. Now, when I get a strata which is exposed on the surface, I do measure some parameters on the surface. Then I understand, okay, this strata is not horizontal, it is slightly inclined. Like here, if you see the rock is exposed here, if you see the character of this rock which is exposed here, this rock is inclined in nature. So this indicates the rock here in this region is not horizontal, rather they are inclined in nature. So these are the indications what the rock types would be there below the surface. So this we call it as something called a outcrop, and we do measure the characteristics of this outcrop, and while measuring the characteristics of outcrop will help us to interpret the subsurface features And what are those features which can be there? There may be a fault, there may be a joint, or there may be an unconformity. So below the surface of the earth, there are number of different varieties of structural features we can expect. So the study of these features, which is expected to be there under the surface or maybe sometimes exposed on the surface, we call it is a branch of structural geology. And what we are going to study in the structural geology, we are going to study that what is this outcrop, what is stratification, what is dip and strike, and what are the relation between strip and strike. So these are few points we will be studying, that is basically about the outcrops which is exposed on the surface. Now that study will help us to understand the structural features what we just discussed, fault, joints, and unconformity. So these features which will be an essential understanding for a civil engineer before we go for any construction activity. So in right now what we have seen on this figure, this is a terrain where what we expose, what we see is a folded strata. And how does it got folded? The reason may be a tectonic activity and not the present tectonic activity, may be the tectonic activity before millions of years. So this features what is present below the surface is being identified by understanding the characteristics or the exposure. So the person who is standing on the surface may not see all this layer. What he sees is a small rock which is exposed, something like this, small portion of the rock. So he will need to interpret, he will need to study that strata, and then he will need to understand that how these layers are below the surface, and that will help the civil engineer to take a correct decision on that. Okay, so now what we are going to see is some of the photographs. Here if you see, if I draw a line, here there is one layer of rock, here there is another layer of rock. Now if you see the same layer of rock, what happens to that rock? That rock is now under this another rock. What happened this? What is the reason for this? The reason for this may be at once upon a time the rocks were on a single layer and there are some forces which were acting on this. As a result, there is a break, and when it broke, so the rocks which was on one side, okay, that rock has moved to the another location. So right now what we see is this condition. So in past this must be the condition. Okay, so this feature what you see here, or what we see here, this feature of breaking of the rock, we call it as a fault. F-A-U-L-T, that is what we just discussed, fault. Fault, you have seen that it is the bending of the strata, and when these bends are not, when there are some number of different fractures where there is no proper movement, so that we call it as a joints. So we are going to study in detail about these faults, but when you are on the surface, see, this is another picture. Here the strata what we can see is slightly folded. It is not like the one which you have seen earlier. A small slightly folded strata, and here may be some other rock type, some folding may be there. This is another rock type. So when the surface, when you see, we may not be able to visualize all these things. Okay, here there is no strata, is a complete strata, but there is no folding or faulting. It's a unfolded or unfaulted strata, or a younger deposits or newly forming deposits. Here if you see that the same kind of rock types, here also see the rock types. Okay, there is one, what we call it as a larger fragments of sedimentary rock, and below that there is another rock type. You see it on the surface is something like this. What the photograph what I am showing is somewhere from here. This is a river which flows. So all the previous photographs we are seeing from this different part of this river. Okay, here there is a river, and I have to get down to the river to take that photographs. But in the surface, what we see is a simple uniform. This is a cultivated land, so this is almost flat. Correct. So this is what we need to understand. This even the telephone lines or the windmills, what is constructed by what we the foundation is done by a civil engineer, need to understand the things what it is happening. So the civil engineer can go to any of this location. Not necessary that every time you will have to work in a simple loose soil area like in the cities where we are in Ahmedabad or Baroda. We may not get any of this kind of rocks, but when we are in the terrains like this, we are going to be consider this kind of areas for the foundation. So this areas, the structures, the understanding of the structures will help us to take a proper and safe foundation. Okay, so this is what the topic we are going to study in the next session. So we'll study in detail these four main geological structures that we call it as a fault, joint, and unconformity. And along with that, we'll have one more thing, that it is an outcrop. How do we identify this outcrop?